Yeah, so yeah, very definitely unique until I started reading your book. I was one of those people who thought that they were completely innocent. I went to their premiere documentary screening here in New York. I was in front of Damien Echols. I was when I first saw them on the first time I saw them was on Piers Morgan,
Right.
and I was like shocked. I was like, how could these people be in jail? So I was one of those people who believed
So you
everything.
you went to west of Memphis, is that right?
I went to West of Memphis,
Gotcha.
not Paradise Lost,
Right.
West of Memphis. Um,
So that was what, 3 years ago?
that was about 3 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, ever since then, I mean, I haven't really caught up or like paid that much attention to it. But it was always one of those weird, interesting cases that I knew, a little bit about, but hadn't gone really into it. And so now with this social history class, I was given a little flexibility and able to, pick a topic and kind of look at it through like a social lens.
Mhm.
And so I originally kind of was interested in looking at how, considering that I thought that they were innocent, how maybe like socioeconomic status played into the
Can you turn off your bell? Is that yours? Yeah.
yes, I know, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't know if you're hearing that. Let me turn that off. Uh
Thanks.
hold on.
How did you get into or go see West of Memphis?
Well, it was after here, let me really make sure this is off. Give me 1 second. All right, I'm gonna quit it. Hopefully that works. Well, after the Piers Morgan thing, I'd watch it with my dad, and and then I think it was shortly thereafter that the documentary came out, and so I was kind of like, and my dad knew that I'd been interested and kind of fascinated by the story,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's when he was like, hey, let's go to to the premiere. The main guy's gonna be there, like, and I was like, yeah, sure. So that's how I got into it. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of like the basic background info.
Right.
So I have some questions here. Some, are based off of the excerpts that I read. Some might be like obvious, like, well, it's written in my book, but I haven't read the entire book, so forgive me.
That's fine.
Um,
Go ahead. No, I'm
so
comfortable
here,
answering any question you want. What will this paper be reviewed only by your teacher, or will it be reviewed by your class?
it will be reviewed only by my teacher. Yeah.
The
We don't. I might share it. We might do like a sometimes at my school for our final kind of project. It's you're in a little group of students and everyone reviews the other person's paper and then you go in with the teacher as part of your final grade and you guys all talk about each other's projects and ask each other questions and ask each other like a variety of different things on everyone else's paper. So at most it would be a couple other kids reviewing my paper, but it's mostly for my teacher.
But it is interesting that you look at this case within the context of social history, because I think that this case, if you kind of leaf through the chapter headings in my book, I talk about the kind of how this case has become a cause celeb case where so many celebrities are involved, and
Right.
also the potency and power of a public relations firm, and how that they can shape public awareness or perception of a case. And how Damien Echols actually went on, you used Piers Morgan, for example, but he went on The View. He went on all these other talk shows, and you can look at those talk shows if you go to William Ramsey Investigates, because I kept an eye on that when he was on, The View with Janine Pirro, and she's kind of asking him questions, but she doesn't know the case well enough to ask him the right questions. But that was one of the fascinating aspects of the case is how it played out in the public arena.
Right. Oh, sorry. Let me try to get rid of this.
That's loud. It's loud in my ears. I mean, I can
Yeah,
take my earphones off.
it's loud in mine too, but if I mute the volume, then I can't hear you.
Okay.
So let me sign out of this. Okay, so I shouldn't be able to receive anything.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully it doesn't come up again. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Um, yes, I think yeah. So that was yeah. I think definitely because that's also another way I saw it was with Johnny Depp getting behind him, and yeah, I saw that the interview on The View, and I do think the public perception. I mean, one of my questions here was kind of like, do you think that, and you referenced Paradise Lost a couple of times in what I read. Do you think Paradise Lost was kind of like the main reason or became like the foundation for the case to be made that the West Memphis Three were innocent. That
Yes,
was
yes. I would say that they provided most of the information to the public that came across as them being innocent. If you break down the three Paradise Lost documentaries, the initial one was the most objective, in my opinion. They had some sequences in there, particularly the last sequence where Damien Echols calls himself the West Memphis Boogeyman. They had sequences that looked kind of semi-objective, but they left it. Once you read the court cases, which are available, or the court records, which are available on Callahan's, you can see how much was left out. How much salient, important information was left out of all three documentaries. But then the second documentary, they lay the blame on one stepfather, Byers, and
right.
even Echols and the three people who were involved were Echols, Misskelleys, and Jason Baldwin. But Echols and Baldwin lay the blame 100%, and they say this 100% on Byers. And then the third one, it switches to Terry Hobbs, the other stepfather, who supposedly wasn't investigated. And then if you even go farther than that, the movie that you saw, West of Memphis, they lay out all the stuff, and they actually got two guys who were, I think, in jail, who had, these statements of double hearsay that there was some kind of Terry Hobbs family secret, but that was even sketchier. And those are laughable evidentiary statements to actually put in court. They're just not even admissible in any court in any place in the United States. So I do think, going back to your question, that those three documentaries really set the stage for Innocence, and that's how it kind of steamrolled. There was also people involved in the second documentary. There were three activists who were trying to prove the innocence of Damien Echols. Damien Echols, and they were also heavily involved in skewing public position, and that's how. And then once that kind of started, it snowballed, and then these public figures, so many celebrities came behind Damien Echols that was really kind of what sealed the public importance. And once the money was raised, which has never really been determined how much money was raised, but it's been guesstimated at between $10 and $20 million. That's when the additional excellent lawyers came involved.
Right.
A PR firm out of New York, Lonnie Soury, Soury, an excellent, a great PR guy, very skilled public relations person. So all these things came out from that initial, the initial three documentaries. Yeah.
And I mean, I just think it's interesting, like this was kind of like a feel-good story in a sense for, people who did believe that they were innocent. But for you, like, while you were, one, like, how did you first get interested in this case, and why did you then end up, looking into the facts and looking into maybe the real facts, the ones that weren't coming out in these documentaries, and then feel compelled to kind of put it together and write a book about it?
That's an excellent question. I was a Aleister Crowley researcher. Aleister Crowley was this occultist who came out of England. He was born in 1875, died in 1947, but he was very influential. So I'd been researching. I wrote a biography about him called The Prophet of Evil, and that was my first book. And so as I was actually researching my second book, which is Children of the Beast, which is all the people Crowley influenced, I came across a video online of a prosecutor talking to Damien Echols on the stand, and they were talking about Aleister Crowley. So that really made me sit up in my chair. Like, I had no idea. I had watched the initial Paradise Lost documentary sometime in the mid to late 90s, and I hadn't really followed the case. And I remembered that they got out of jail in August of 2011. So this was after 2011 that I got interested in the case. But I remember they got out, and I just thought, okay, there must have been something wrong with the case. I really didn't know how and under what circumstances they were released. But once I realized that Aleister Crowley was involved in this case, or there was a mention of Crowley, and they were talking to Echols because he had made a drawing board of like a secret alphabet that named his name, Jason Baldwin, and Aleister Crowley on a piece of paper. And the prosecutor was asking him questions on the stand during his trial. And so that really was like, okay, what's the story with this case? Now, I had a very vague notion that they were innocent. So I just assumed they were innocent. But then I realized that I could go back and look at all the court records. And so they were all available at a site named Callahan. So I just started reading through, and I was astonished at how much the police had, how much information the police had garnered about these guys before their trial, and how much information they had gotten about the occult, and how Damien Echols was involved in the occult. And so that really kind of piqued my interest. And I took a position once I wrote my book Abomination, Devil Worship, and Deception, and the West Memphis Three Murders, I was like pretty much alone saying the occult was involved in this. There's some kind of attachment to Crowley. Aleister Crowley himself said that the perfect sacrifice is like a young 8-year-old boy. And these 3 victims were all 8-year-old boys. And there's elements of these crimes that fit in a pattern of an occult ritual. Not really something formalized, but there was a full moon. There's all kinds of things involved. But that's really how I got started looking into the West Memphis Three was really about that video mentioning Aleister Crowley.
And did you ever face any kind of backlash from the media or from any of the members from the West Memphis Three for your book?
Yes. So I actually had my book was taken off of Amazon. There was a complaint made, and I was threatened with a lawsuit. I can send you the email that shows that they threatened to sue me. It was through another guy who was known to be hanging out with Echols at the time. His name was I can't remember his name. Anyway, he was a friend of Echols who was kind of like an intermediary, saying that I had used in my original version of the documentary, I had used some of Damien Echols' artwork, and they claimed that that was a copyright violation. I was using it, I believed, in a fair use context, which was allowable. Anyway, I took that out. I actually battled. There was a lot of back and forth between me and this guy who was an intermediary for Damien Echols and Amazon. But eventually Amazon took my side, and my book has been up ever since we kind of went through that argument. But I also had, when my book was up on Amazon, I had a significant group of people go on to Amazon and give me 1-star reviews and say that it was a disgrace. And if you look at the book, you know that I reference all of these court documents. There's about 400 or 500 references in there indexed about all these court cases. But they said that I was making stuff up, that it was baloney. I also had some strange occurrences happen, but I definitely got some pushback. I mean, people called me all kinds of names and terminology, and on social media, my position was in a minority of a minority, really, because there were people who believed that are out there. They're colloquially known as the Nons and, the people who think he did it. I forgot the other name. Anyway, but they think, a lot of people who believe that Echols was guilty don't view the occult as an important motivator. But I think the post-release events show that Damien Echols is a very serious practitioner and observer of occult ideas.
And was there ever kind of a doubt throughout the whole book process, throughout the entire your time researching, was there ever a doubt in your mind that they could actually be innocent?
The thing that weighed everything against, and from a legal perspective, that in this, guilt is a legal term, that they're objectively guilty. Once they signed the agreements to get out of jail in August 2011, once they agreed to an Alford plea with their attorneys, which were like excellent attorneys, they're guilty as a matter of law, and they're still guilty. They're still under probation until 2021. So that is really, and the real question for me was the guilt determinant? So they're actually in interesting figures because they were found guilty twice. All three were found guilty in 1994 and then signed and said they were guilty in 2011. That doesn't happen very often in criminal cases. It's actually a rarity. But so the real question for me is, are these guilty pleas and are the guilty situations, are they correct? And in my opinion, definitely correct, looking at all the evidence.
But there was never a doubt in your mind that no one else could have possibly committed these murders?
Well, no, that's a good question, because I did look at all of these other red herrings. And I looked and saw where they were coming from. I looked at the Byers. I looked at Hobbs. I looked at what's known as the Bojangles guy. A guy was found bloody in a restaurant the night of the murders. That was fairly close to the murders. I looked at all other potentials. I looked at all the stories. And even those stories, they came up flat because they were never really tested in court. The most recent claim that Terry Hobbs did it is based upon so-called evidence that was found by the defense but never brought into the court of law and actually ascertained whether it is. There's supposedly a hair that it fits Terry Hobbs with, a 98.5% accuracy, that it's consistent with his DNA. which doesn't prove anything. It doesn't mean he was there. And it was also tested through the defense. So all these things have to be tried in court, including all these hearsay statements and stuff like that. So looking at that, if Damien Echols and his excellent, I mean, he was able with the money to get the best appellate attorney, probably Reardon, in the country, who had worked on Barry Bonds and all these other high-profile figures. If he had such devastating evidence showing that he wasn't guilty, they should have brought it into court immediately and put it in there. And proven not only to the court but to the world that this evidence is outstanding, is irrefutable, right?
Right.
That didn't happen. That did not happen. So, and that's an interesting thing, because once they got released, there was a statement by, I think, Echols prior to their release in August of 2011, that it was easier for him to get out of court and fight the charges while he was out of court. And nothing has really happened from those three guys since they've been out. They've just lived under probation, and there's no real attempt to find the so-called other perps. And I think that's important. I think that's important to know.
And I guess from like a social aspect, do you think we should kind of fear these people that have like satanic or goth-like tendencies or appearances or, proven ideologies? Or can someone be satanic and completely harmless and peaceful?
That's a great question. That's an excellent question. I think that you can definitely kind of sift through these different personalities, whether somebody's a goth, whether somebody's a Satanist. What we know for a fact, and this is written in the OTO, which was Crowley's secret society, the Ordo Templi Orientis, that Damien Echols was a member of the Arkansas Ordo Templi Orientis, written in their own documents, and that he had enough occult books to actually have the OTO chapter in Arkansas name their library the Damien Echols Library. And they just found, and this is recently, you can listen to this interview on Ed Opperman. There was a guy who bought Damien Echols and his wife Lori. He bought their storage lockers. There were 2 storage lockers that they owned in Arkansas and failed to pay. And somebody bought them and went through, and there's about 20, he had about 1,200 to 2,000 books that were occult related from Damien Echols. So you have to parse through these individuals. We know the OTO, and Crowley himself was a very sinister figure. He was involved in sacrifice, blood rituals, and things like that. So there's definitely an important distinction between a goth and a practicing Satanist. We know, and Damien Echols has stated that he's licked blood, right? And he's stated all of these other strange... He's admitted to all these other strange practices. If you look through the Exhibit 500, which was Damien Echols' psych records from 3 different hospitals, you can see a pattern of, and this is determined by a wide variety of, and there's actually another psychiatrist, a guy by the name of George Woods, who wrote an affidavit in 2000. You can see that from 1993, 1994, there were 3 hospitals who talked about Echols, and then another guy in 2000 that he had very strange ideation. So a run-of-the-mill Satanist, I think, you have to look at it, at least in my opinion, as a case-by-case basis. But Damien Echols has a very peculiar record. And there's actually was a movie that was filmed, I believe, in New York. It was called IRL. It was an independent film. And in it, Damien Echols is handling a shotgun, which is actually a violation of his probation. But he's sitting with another known high occultist, a guy by the name of Genesis P. Orridge. And just that, you can't make a judgment just by having 2 people together. But the fact they're in a movie together, and I know Genesis P. Orridge's background and what he was involved in, Children of Psychic, or Temple of Psychic Youth, and his books, that it's remarkable that Damien Echols would actually allow himself to be filmed in a movie with that guy. So I think that you have to look and see what this individual really is up to. And I take the, like, there's, Echols wrote in his, and this is included in Exhibit 500, he wrote about, being the right-hand side of Satan blowing up an ammunition dump. And that's where I got the title Abomination, was something that Damien Echols wrote. Huh. So I think it's important, getting to your question, you got to look at each person individually.
Okay.
That's what that would be my argument.
And kind of, I guess from an even broader perspective, how would you kind of sum up the role of Satanism or even just religion or beliefs kind of in the legal system as a whole?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, what's somebody does somebody ideology indicate their propensity for committing individual crimes, right? Certain types of crimes. When I first started writing about this book, about this topic, I was told there's no such thing as occult crimes, which is why I included occult-related or motivated crimes as a section in Abomination. And so some people have this ideology of violence, lust for blood, whether it's the Rippers out of Chicago or some of these other type of motivated people, the vampire killers of Kentucky. These guys were involved in all kinds of strange stuff: blood drinking, violence to the human body, and so you could see that these things led up to a bigger crime, and so it's tough to say somebody's ideology if somebody's in the mob, let's say they're known members of the mafia, does that mean they have a higher propensity to commit a crime?
Yeah.
Those are good questions. But here's the quote this is from Damien Echols' own writing. I can see physical changes happening in my body. I can tell it's getting ready. The abominations or abominations have already begun to be spit forth from the earth. I have seen some of them. I will become one soon. I will be the king of freaks. I see a perfect explosion, God's ammunition dump going up in the flames of righteousness, Satan storming heaven, his artillery captain, a fiercely grinning fool with red flayed cheeks, Damien by name, never to be Michael Hutchison again. The end is here. Kiss your ass goodbye. That's in his own writing. So that's actually from the court cases. And that's how I got the title of the book.
Okay. Wait,
I think that's
can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
But I think that's a good question. What is somebody's ideology as a propensity to commit a crime,
Also, for me, it's like, are these people, and I'm kind of thinking of this right now, it's just like, are these people, do we have a place for these people in society? Because even though they may have, stranger kind of views, or are these people just mentally ill? I think it's a valid question.
I think it's a very valid question.
I don't know. What would you say about that?
If you look at Damien Echols' medical history,
yeah,
there's serious problems. He was actually prescribed Imprimine or some type of psychiatric drug, and he was I think the SSA, the Social Security Administration, had given him a full Social Security disability for his condition prior to the deaths. So an objective third party gave him that designation.
Wow. And this is kind of more like a random kind of question.
Okay.
But what would you, if you were in a room with the West Memphis Three, what would you say to them?
Why did you do it?
Huh?
Why'd you kill him? I mean, the thing is that they've all admitted to committing the crimes in one place or another, whether it was Damien Echols at a softball game, or the most important confessions, which isn't the original Jessie Misskelleys confession that took place, I believe it was on June 3rd, 1993, but it was the post-conviction confessions that are recorded by Jessie Misskelleys with his hand on a Bible, his attorney saying don't do it, and him saying I want something done about it, and saying that, and implicating himself, Damien Echols, and Jason Baldwin in the murders.
And you think that, there's been a lot made that, I mean, I know you go through with kind of like the myths about the case that Misskelley didn't actually have the IQ that was that low.
Yeah.
Do you think kind of the pressure from the police that's been talked about a lot in all these documentaries, do you think that's valid? Do you think that they really pressed him as much as they kind of say that they do?
Let's just hypothetically state that if Jesse's original confession was flawed, or if there was something wrong with it, why did he confess post-conviction? Like, he had already been stamped, you're going to jail. Why did he confess after that? How did they force him to confess on his car out of the jail or out of the court? He confessed to the two cops, and then he did it twice. He actually, what's known as the Bible confession, and then the confession against the advice of the attorney, both recorded. And I included those as appendixes to, or appendices to my book so people can read them. That, there's all kinds of arguments. And actually, in any situation, if I was a defense attorney and my client had confessed, I would always attack that confession in court. I would always question the validity of the confession. That's commonplace. It would actually be malpractice if you didn't. So you're always going to come up with some reason, and there are always standards that you can nullify confession, whether you're under the age of 18, whether you're under the prop, or whether you can actually consent if you don't have a high enough IQ. Can you state that? So Jessie's IQ always has been deflating, so it can get under the 70 level, right? And so that's he's been tested at 88. I mean, obviously not the brightest guy in the world, but these are all very standard kind of legal things. Challenge the confession. Okay, let's say that confession isn't good. Why did he have a post-conviction confession? Doesn't make sense.
And I guess kind of like one of my final questions for you is kind of, I mean, definitely a very interesting case, but why, I asked a similar question earlier, but why did you feel like you had to write this book? Like, now do you regret it? Like, I know
No, I don't regret writing the book. The main impetus for me to write the book is because I believed at that time that I was correcting an injustice that had been served upon the public, which was that these guys were innocent, that they were wearing black and walking down the street, and the police railroaded them. And so that was why I wrote it, so that you could have a decent-sized book with all the case records that were salient as to why these guys were the properly charged and convicted perpetrators of the crime.
And why?
Because at that time, that was a very, that was a minority of a minority position.
Right. And also, I guess something I just thought of right now is, Damien Echols has his whole, he has his own thing with the whole Satan and all. But I guess, and he's definitely the primary character in this whole thing. But as for Baldwin and Misskelley, what do you think? Was there ever any evidence that, they had satanic thoughts, or why were they implicated in it? Were they just like accomplices? They still, carried out, if it's true, carried out a horrific crime. So why them?
It's a great question. It seems like when you're looking at what the police were doing their research, it looks like there was groups of kids with a lot of free time getting into all kinds of trouble. And Jessie Misskelleys talked about Stonehenge, people being met there. There's talk about all kinds of sexual assaults taking place. Damien Echols had already been under probation because he was involved with another girl. So these guys were all kind of getting into trouble. Jessie Misskelleys was known as somebody who was a brawler, a fighter. And Damien, according to what the evidence shows, is that, Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin both had evil tattooed on the knuckles of their hand, right? And Damien Echols wrote 666 on his shoe. But they're spending a lot of time together, Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin particularly, and at some point, Jessie Misskelleys gets gets involved with them at the wrong time, in the wrong place, I guess, on June, on May 5th, 1993, and things go wrong. Whether it was a design case, there's also statements that are in the court documents that show that Damien Echols was walking around with a black briefcase with photographs of people, taking pictures and doing strange stuff. So whether the kids were targeted or not, I have no idea. But there might have been a lot it may have been, as Jessie stated, like spontaneous crime, but it may have had a malice aforethought component to it. Not sure.
And how do you think? I was actually just taking a look the other day at Damien Echols' website, and even his artwork, I don't know if you've seen it, is very like witchcraft looking.
Right. Well, that's an interesting thing because he actually requested the Encyclopedia of Witchcraft when he was in jail. He wanted to read that, so he definitely has the kind of a wide-ranging interest in occult subjects.
But he also, listening to him is interesting as well because, he's quite well spoken. You know,
yeah, I would say so.
People. I saw him. I was 10 feet away from him, and you definitely get a very weird vibe from him, but he's very, he's not a stupid person.
I don't think he is.
And so, I don't know. What do you think he'll ever like? I mean, definitely won't come forth, I assume. But like, what do you think a person like that? What do Satanists nowadays do with themselves? I
Well,
guess.
that's a great question. He, according to himself, he's changing his body. You know, he's putting these tattoos on himself that are consistent with John Dee's kind of magical experiments. Have you seen the black sun tattoo that's on his back?
I have not.
Okay, I'm going to send that to you right here. But he
Okay.
still seems to be involved in promoting and, you know, getting in touch with people. He's traveling around the country right now giving magical classes. Do you see that picture? It's coming through right now. So I do think he's still involved in, like he gave a talk in Houston. I think it was at South by Southwest or something like that. Here, I'll send you this picture too.
Okay.
See if those come through. But so
Yep.
he advocates. I think he's doing a podcast right now with two other guys that he's talking. The title of it is Magic Revolution, magic with a K, right? So it distinguishes. It's
Right.
kind of like Crowley's magic. K is the 11th letter in the alphabet. It's like the 11th letter in the alphabet is the it's the number of magic. It comes together 5 and 6. But so I think that he's still promoting or involved in the promotion of his magical ideas. And he was asked on the stand, by the way, he was asked, what do you know about magic? And I think his response was, I know everything about magic, just to paraphrase it.
Wow. And I mean, I'm sure. I think there might have been a section. I'm not sure. But are there a lot of, I mean, definitely not similar, but there are a lot of cases with, similar cases really to this one where you have satanic influence and kind of like brutal murders of children or people in general.
They actually just had one that took place in Argentina. They just arrested a couple of people, but it involved a young boy who was abducted and murdered, and he was 11 years old, and he was dismembered in a satanic ritual.
Okay.
So it was in the name of the child was Mario Agustin Salto.
Okay.
You can read about that. But yeah,
And
so these things are rare. I don't think they're commonplace at all. But
Right.
I do think that these there's definitely situations where people are killed for occult reasons. Whether you want to go to Matamoros, whether you want to talk about some of the earlier names I talked about, the Ripper Crew, or some of these old some of these Satanists are very they're serious about hurting people.
And would you deem every Satanist?
Like I said, it's a case by case basis.
Yeah.
I don't operate in generalities, but
Right.
Damien Echols, I think if you watch the end of West of Memphis, he states, or he says in the beginning, I want to be the greatest magician that ever lived. You remember that?
Huh.
Do you remember that statement?
I saw it a couple years ago now.
Yeah. So I think he has those ambitions, and that's why he went to Salem, Massachusetts, because that's where he was more comfortable with witches. Do you see that tattoo, that back tattoo?
Yeah, wait, hold on. I'm afraid. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's part of it. And so if you scroll up the second from the top, you can see this. He's standing in what's known as the witches' alphabet, also known as the Theban alphabet.
Huh.
And those are sigils in the background. So that's him giving a talk in Houston. So he's still moving around. He's still kind of...
I guess according to you, it's really kind of like he and, his support cast behind him kind of used his goth-like appearance and said, look, we've been wrongly convicted just because I look this way. And then finally when he's out, he's kind of embracing it and saying, look, like we can all kind of do these rituals and it doesn't mean we're violent.
Right.
Even though
Well, it's interesting because people who watch or observe what Echols is up to have that distinction. It's like, okay, just because you're into the occult doesn't mean that you have a propensity for violence, that you'll harm someone or
Right.
you'll hurt kids. which I generally agree with. However, if you get into some of the darker rituals, even Crowley wrote, and some of these other, there's involved in ritual drowning, tying and drowning, like literal, and that's what happened to the kids. They were tied and drowned. They weren't beaten to death. One of them died from a violent beating, but the other two were drowned, according to Peretti's statement, who was the forensic investigator.
And I'm just gonna kind of wrap it up here. I've been thinking this whole time, kind of, it's a more personal question. How did you even? I know Crowley was kind of the first person you were researching, but how did you even get into researching him and kind of this subject matter as a whole?
I was a 9/11 researcher. I was actually just an individual researcher. I was probably, even before the turn of the millennium, 2001, always investigating other avenues of information regarding any subject, whether it was false flag terror, false history, hidden history. So I was always involved in that. I was a 9/11 researcher. I was interested in the numerology of 9/11, which led back to Crowley, which gave me and I had a very good understanding of Crowley, and led Crowley to this subject, the West Memphis Three. And then, I've just kind of followed these investigations. And then I wrote a book, Children of the Beast, about all the people Crowley influenced. So I think the 20th century was influenced more by Crowley than people recognize. And then I just finished a documentary called The Smiley Face Killers. He was abducting, torturing, and murdering young college-age kids in the U.S. I would suggest somebody your age and your friends that watch that on Vimeo. I'll send you the link right now, but I'll give you a free pass. You can take a look at it. But it's very important. Somebody your age, if you go off to college, I would watch this, because there's probably about 200 men who have been abducted and murdered. And the police really haven't keyed into what's going on. But I think my video explains everything.
Well, look, thank you for your time. This was very interesting. Kind of messes up my entire essay, though, because I was always kind of writing about how I thought that they were innocent, because I was one of those people who believed it, but I think I'll have to change it now.
Well, I would say that you could read my book, but you can also go back to the case files. And the things that they can't explain is, why haven't they arrested somebody else for the crime? Why did Jesse confess after he got convicted, when there was no interest for him, there was no force? And if you listen to that video with his attorney, he's saying, I want to confess. I don't care. The attorney's saying, this is against your interest. I don't care. So why is that? And why did all these guys state it, whether it was Baldwin in jail, Damien Echols at the softball meeting, or Jessie Misskelleys, why did they all admit or confess to the crime? And then why is the occult a common theme from before the crime to right now? Those are all, I think, questions that should be answered.
And I'm actually curious, have you ever, after this book, have you ever felt kind of threatened in any way?
Oh, that's a great question. How would I answer that? I would say this line of work is dangerous, because I do think that there's a lot. If you look at Damien Echols' friends and all these people he's associating with,
probably some scary people.
It's a definite. These are scary cast of characters. Just look into Genesis P. Origin, his past. They're dangerous people. The people, Genesis P. Origin is a dangerous person.
But you've never been, apart from that they sent you with the threatening to sue you, you've never been kind of contacted or had any other interactions with these people?
No comment. No comment.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and I'll keep you posted if you want to read my paper.
I'd love to read it. Yeah, I'd love to read it.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
Felix, good night. Take a look at the Smiley Face Killers documentary. Look at the trailer, and I have your email, so I'll send you the passcode. You can watch it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Felix, have a good night.
Have a good night.
You too.